The synthesizer is nothing but a new step in the evolution of musical instruments. To call it a machine, we would call in every other instrument a machine too. We could call a piano a machine, because have you ever seen a piano on the side of the lever? It's a very complicated mechanism.
Was this before or after the first Moog Quartet concert?
It was after. It was about 72 or 73, after Popcorn came out.
Yeah.
The other thing is too, I love this here. Played live, 4 Moogs.
Was this from the concert too?
I remember when I worked with Jean-Jacques Perry in the beginning, he used his ondioline, and I played a clavichord, an old one. But I felt always very frustrated because he had an electronic instrument and I just did, you know, that blah, 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 blah. And one day came the guy who did that famous commercial for
Eric Sidé?
Eric Sidé.
Yeah.
And he introduced me to a box like this, looked like a telephone switch. I said, what is this? And he brought me this sound. I said, oh my God.
Eric Sidé showed you that?
Yes.
I didn't know
said,
that.
I have to have that. I said, Eric, from Robert Moog, who is he? No, he's a kind of a crazy engineer who does all these weird instruments, who lives up in a little hamlet in north state of New York, Trumansburg. So of course I called you up, and I came there, and in his basement, I remember only it was very wet, and I mean, horrible. I became so sick, and there he was battling on the modules of the Moog synthesizer, right? And the first Moog was still in a very wooden box.
Yeah.
Usually they use this wood to put coffins in, you know, but you put it. Anyway, by the way, this box is now at the Smithsonian.
No.
Yes. That box is the Smithsonian now. I sold it to my neighbor on 55th Street, forgot his name again, and he gave it into the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
You know. Listen, those things would be very valuable today, you know.
I remember, sitting, I was right in the middle of the orchestra. My parents were there, and my Aunt Dorothy was there.
That was actually the first time the Moogs performed live in a concert, or not?
It was for sure the first time 4 Moogs performed live.
Of course, Keith Emerson and other people played always in Paul, but 4 Moogs.
Oh, this was before that.
Yes,
it's way before, and nobody had ever done anything like that. I was holding my breath because I wanted everything to work,
It seemed to work.
Everybody takes it for granted today that electronic equipment will always work. Somehow, the state of the art has advanced.
Listen,
back then it was.
The problem was you worked doing the you got the boxes, and it went always out of tune. We had to retune it.
Well, the first musicians I ever worked with on the synthesizer weren't interested in melodies. They were interested in new sounds. All they wanted to do was to be able to make new sounds. Yeah. So they didn't care about tuning. Yeah. And then we added a keyboard, and it wouldn't stay in tune because we didn't worry about it. And then all of a sudden everybody wanted to play melodies because it was part of pop music.
Now, actually, every Moog can be built differently. It depends on your own requirements. So it's not actually one instrument. You can build it up the way you want. It's like an erector set, you see?
When I began doing stuff for electronic musicians, I built modules, and each module was a little box with an input and an output that did one thing and one thing only, to either making a waveform, sound waveform, or modifying it somehow, or making a shape that the waveform would change by. And you could connect these together with cables, with patch cords. So that's how we began. And by the time 2 or 3 years went by, this was around 1967, we had a whole system of these things. We could put them all in a box and connect them together. So we thought of the process of making the sounds as putting the parts together, which is what synthesize means, to put together something whole out of all of its parts. And that's when we decided to use the word synthesizer. And in fact, in our 1967 catalog of Moog music, we had a little section called The Synthesizer Concept, and we explained what we meant by the use of the word synthesizer. We didn't mean to imply that what it made were synthetic sounds. They were synthesized sounds. They weren't fake anything. They were real synthesized sounds.
That's such a great idea, because I mean, I think about early computer culture. You remember one of those most famous images we have of all the early computers was flowcharts, this, if so, then do this, and you have these little line and like a little box and a triangle, stuff like that. But those were like logic charts, being able to trace the flow of information through a very specific system. And that's basically when I hear you talking about that. Yeah. But for me, sampling was a way of playing with systems of memory and being able to remember a record from 1972, take the bass line from that, splice it, into a record from 1995, take a horn riff from a 1922 record, a drum solo from 1960, whatever, and mix it up. So I was synthesizing found sounds, pulling them all together, and being able to have, again, like the real sound, but edited and spliced and diced in the same way, but without, the tones would come from the collage of all the different sounds running. Yeah. So I would just have to type on the keyboard and use a mouse to navigate. But the cool thing is, what I'm hearing you is you're navigating about the idea of pitch envelopes and stuff like that. It's much more, in a certain sense, the composer Yanis Xenakis' work? Oh yeah. Between him and playing with Sun Ra, it was kind of interesting to see. One guy was super classical music, the other guy was free jazz. And the Sun Ra Orchestra, I view their take on what you're talking about is they would apply this idea of myth science to it, like being able to almost have the tones and the way you're talking about the oscillators and the filter patches and the chords. But your pitch envelopes and everything could also make drum machines. That's right. Yeah, so you'd be able to take a really thick bass tone, for example, and have that be the bass drum. Yeah, once a snare drum, like stuff like that.
Once you had the envelope, and if it were controlling pitch, it could control anything. It could make it sound louder and softer. It could make it brighter and darker. It could change the whole sound from one thing to another on the same contour. And that was one of the really important concepts behind the synthesizer.
So you could say that you're almost an inventor of a certain style of drum machine too, right? I mean, that's another big deal with hip hop right now, is the whole programming of beats.
My first encounters with Bob came after, didn't they? It came after I'd actually discovered the Moog. There was a studio in England called Advision Studios, and a guy called Mike Vickers had bought one of the big modular systems. And he couldn't afford to pay for it. So what he did, he left it in the studio because he knew that when keyboard players came in and saw it, they'd go, "Oh, great, can we have a go?" And then the guy there would say, "Yeah, but it's going to cost you $50 to have a go on it." And that was how we made a lot of money, and we used it a lot, and it was fantastic. And then I discovered the Mini Moog. Yeah. I don't know whether you know the very first story of how I bought my first Mini Moog.
How was that?
Well, the manager that we had at the time, it was a bit of a villain. He said, "I've got an actor." Yeah. He said, "who works for me." And I'll tell you who it was. An actor called Jack Wilde. He played. I can't remember what he was in Summit anyway. And he bought a Mini Moog. And Brian said he wants to sell it. I said, oh yeah. And he said he'll do you a really good deal because it doesn't work. And I said, what do you mean it doesn't work? He said, it doesn't work. He said he'll do you a really, really good deal, like half price what he paid for it. And I said, all right. Okay, well, I'll have a look at it. And there wasn't anybody who fixed them or anything there. So it arrived, and it was mint. It was all in all the original, because they used to come in the original, like plastic, all the big, thick foil and things. And I took it out, and I plugged it in, expecting smoke or something, and it all lit up right. And put the headphones in, put them on. And it was like it never been played. It was absolutely perfect. It was absolutely fantastic. Yeah. This is not a joke, but it's absolutely true. So I thought, well, I better be honest here, and I left it on soak all night, still fantastic. And I phoned up Brian, the manager, and I said, look, I've got this minimum. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. He said, well, I don't understand. He said, I'll get the guy on the phone. So he got the actor on the phone, and I spoke to him, and he said, listen, I've got to tell you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. He said, no, he said, I've tried it a lot. He said, I can only get it to play one note at a time. Yeah. And I said, and I said, it's monophonic, it only plays one note at a time. He said, well, that's no good to me. He said, oh, you can have it. So I bought it for half price, and that was the first one. And then I went out, and over the course of the next 2 years, I bought another 8. So I ended up.
You see, you needed more than one note at a time.
Oh, they were. That's right. Well, they were fantastic. I used to use 4 on stage for yes, and then 4 around. And I think the Mini Moog is. Because I had was it the P model, the one that was the modular one?
Yeah.
I had that, but for on the stage, there has never been anything to surpass it. I mean, it changed the face of music. Absolutely changed. I mean, for the first time, we were talking on the radio station the other day when you could, for the first time in your life as a keyboard player, you could go on and give the guitarists a run for their money. Because before, the guitarists were always nice and loud. Oh, here comes a keyboard solo. Really quiet and really going. But suddenly we had something that was louder than them, would cut through concrete. I mean, when you saw guitar players, they hated it. When Keith's the keyboard player, oh shit, he's got a Mini Moog. So they're looking for 11 on the volume control. It's the only way they can compete. And there's, nobody's ever come up with anything like the Mini Moog, and they won't. But to me, I think that's the most important keyboard instrument that's ever been made. I'm not saying that because you stand there, but it is. It's the most important one that's ever been made, because it changed the face of music for people. It was absolutely fantastic. And I bow before you forever for that, Moog. There's not one knob on there or switch that you don't use.
Yeah. That's not just taking up space. It does something. It has a function.
Everything. Yeah. How many things are made today that you've got? Probably you don't use 90% of what's on them. I mean, it's a bit like your wife, isn't it? Really, you only use 10% of of what you need, and then the other 90% is superfluous to needs. Really, It's probably why I've been married so many times. But the Mini.
Oh man, you're killing me, man. Have a sexual mind. How I play, how I tell everybody, male or female, especially the females, I play sexual because it's foreplay, climax, after, and then down after. So it's a sexual thing with me. And so the touch of the Mini Moog is like a female to me. So I have knobs, playing. I have sonatas, I have different screams, different whoos, or different at the bottom, and touching it and playing it And thank you very much.
You know, I used to think like that. I used to think of it sexually with
You
the
still
four playing
do.
the clavinet, but unfortunately, I found that my solos were very short when I did it.
But see, you don't have
to
the
stop.
solo.
I had to stop thinking like that.
You can play it rhythmically and chapel all night long. It took him trial and error, and he experimented, just like we experiment when we're playing. I think. I don't want to talk out of line.
He just came up with an instrument that could make sounds that nobody else could. Absolutely nobody's ever come close. And it's come from the inside of this man. It's come from this man's heart, and he's given it to us.
I'll tell you where I think it comes from. I think it comes from out there, and it comes through me into the instrument, and then the music comes through you guys in the instrument, and that out.
We're all being tapped. It was all given to us as an inventor, musician, composer, songwriter, through the one, believing that it all comes from there. It's coming through y'all, through the camera.
Bob's given us an instrument with an X factor, and if you try to find out what the X factor is, you're wasting your time. Just be thankful it's there.
Yeah.
It's a great thing.
Yeah. You remember when we finally got together and I had built up some couple of voltage control oscillators?
Oh, yeah.
What? How looking back, how did that strike you?
That was one of the most exciting times in my life. To be able to sit there and be within fingertip control of what were really new sounds at that time.
When you took these circuits and your tape recorder down into the basement, and you actually put music together, that blew my mind. It sounded one way, it sounded very electronic and striking, but not musical on the bench. But then when you assembled sounds musically on the tape, all of a sudden it became a piece of music. That was totally amazing.
The thing about electronic instruments is that as soon as you touch them, if you're a musician, they immediately trigger off musical ideas, because the reference point is there. I mean, there is a reference point of a world of music and then there is the other reference point is that music that potentially would be there. The music that could grow out of sounds that the traditional instruments can't make, and that the traditional references aren't there for. We talked, for instance, about, at the very beginning days, about whether the instrument should have a keyboard.
That's right.
In the very first few days, should it have a keyboard? Is that necessary?
Yeah, there were all sorts of ways of shaping the pitch of the sound.
Yeah.
Keyboard was just one of them.
Yeah.
And in fact, I remember thinking that this keyboard is not necessarily for changing pitch. It could change anything. It could change loudness. It could change vibrato. It could change the tone color. Anything.
And eventually, of course, it got to that level.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling that a keyboard would make sense. And I know that Vladimir Usichevsky had said, you and he had spoken, and he had said that the keyboard may not be a good idea because it would force people to think very traditionally.
In a way, he was afraid of how people's keyboard technique would come through on material that really shouldn't be organized according to pitch.
And looking at it retrospectively now, it's 40 years later, Bob.
Yeah.
He was partially right.
Yeah.
Because a great deal of the material that that was generated by synthesizers since then has been material which could very well have been generated without synthesizers. And
Yeah.
in thinking that way, Vladimir was right.
Yeah.
But of course, what I don't think either of us realized was how much that would change the whole nature of thinking about what keyboard-controlled sounds
Yeah.
could be.
It's interesting to me the steps in the evolution. When you and I first worked together, because of your influence on me, I thought that what we were doing together was figuring out ways to make new kinds of sounds, so that these sounds could then be combined on a tape recorder and sequenced to make interesting sound sequences. From that, the people who made music for commercial music for radio and TV began to use the same equipment to make evocative sounds for commercials. And because the general public got used to those sounds, the next step was using them for melodic purposes.
Yes.
So it's as if what we began got diverted or deflected into the mainstream, and then when it came back, it was suddenly all tonal and keyboard oriented. It was in 1970 that I visited our dealer in London. He said, I'd like to introduce you to a young musician who just bought one of your modular systems. And he took me to an apartment nearby, introduced me to Keith Emerson. Yeah. As I remember, we had tea. Do you believe that? Yeah. Maybe I'm making that up.